On a morning when the sky looked angry, loud thunder crashed like a roaring lion, shaking the ground around Holy Ground Ministries. The rain poured down heavily, drumming against the rooftops and splashing into puddles, but it didn't stop the crowd. People came from everywhere, hurrying into the massive church hall, their footsteps echoing on the wet stone floor. The big space was packed with men, women, and even children, all talking in hushed voices. The air felt thick with excitement and something else, an uneasy feeling, like something big was about to happen. The scent of damp earth mixed with the faint aroma of burning incense, adding to the tension in the room. Everyone's eyes kept turning toward the door. They were waiting for someone special, someone they believed could change their lives. Her name was Prophetess Lami. See it all. People said she was no ordinary woman. They believed she could look deep into your heart and tell you all your secrets. They also said she could pray for sick people and make them well again. Some even called her a miracle worker. But not everyone trusted what they heard. Shadows flickered under the glow of the lanterns, casting eerie shapes on the walls as the storm raged outside. Among the crowd was a quiet woman named Obi. She didn't clap or cheer like the others. Instead, she sat still, her face showing she was thinking hard. Obi had seen something that didn't make sense, something that didn't make sense, something that made her question everything. While the people around her were filled with excitement, Obi's heart was full of doubt. The dim light made her eyes appear even darker as she watched and waited. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to uncover a secret, one so shocking that it would change everything. A long time ago, before anyone knew her as Lami See It All, Zara was just a simple, kind girl from a small Yoruba village. She had the warmest smile and a heart full of love. Her laughter echoed through the dusty village paths, bringing joy to those who heard it. Everyone in the village admired her because she was always helping others. On Sundays, her sweet voice filled the church as she sang in the choir and led prayers. Her voice was so beautiful it felt like it could calm a raging storm. The villagers would often say, "Zara is special. She's going to do great things one day." And it seemed true. She worked hard, prayed often, and dreamed of spreading God's word to help more people. But no one could have guessed how much she would have to give up to make her dreams come true. As Zara grew older, she started her own small church under the shade of a giant baobab tree. But things weren't easy. Only a few people came to her services, and she felt like she was failing. She prayed and prayed for help, but her dream of touching many lives seemed so far away. Then, one day, everything changed. She went to a big conference for pastors where she met a man named Pastor Idris. He was famous and had many followers. His presence commanded attention, and his deep voice carried wisdom and power. Idris noticed her and pulled her aside. He looked her in the eye and said, "Do you really want your ministry to grow? If you do, you must be ready to make a big sacrifice." Zara was confused and scared. What kind of sacrifice was he talking about? Pastor Idris told her about a secret ritual. He said it was the only way to become famous and have a big ministry. The flickering candlelight made his face look almost unreal, and Zara felt a chill run down her spine. At first, she didn't want to do it, but the thought of finally achieving her dreams was too tempting. Late one night, she agreed to join the ritual. She gave up something very precious, her ability to have children, in exchange for power and fame. As the ritual ended, Zara felt something strange inside her. A powerful energy rushed through her, making her feel strong but also very scared. After that night, everything changed. Crowds of people started coming to her services. They were amazed at how she seemed to know things about their lives that no one else could. People began calling her Lami See It All because they believed she could see everything. Her fame spread quickly, and soon everyone in Nigeria knew her name. But what no one knew was the secret behind her success. The deal Zara made came with a heavy price, one that would haunt her forever. The weight of her choice pressed down on her shoulders, even as the cheers of the crowd grew louder. When the moon lit up the night sky and the world was fast asleep, something very strange happened at Lami's mansion. She wasn't just a normal person. Late at night, she turned into something truly terrifying, a creature that was part human and part snake. The wind whispered through the trees as if carrying secrets, and the sound of rustling leaves masked her movements. Quietly, she would sneak out of her big house and head toward a nearby river. Once there, she would slide into the water, the ripples disappearing as if she had never been there, and disappear beneath its surface. Deep down under the river was a magical world ruled by the Marine Queen, a powerful serpent-like being who had given Lami her special powers. The Marine Queen let her see into people's lives and know their secrets, The underwater kingdom was a vast, glowing realm filled with shimmering aquatic creatures and floating golden orbs that pulsed with energy. She could even make them scared of things they didn't understand. But this power wasn't free. Lami had to serve the Marine Queen forever. She no longer owned her soul, and every single night she had to turn into a snake and meet with others who are part of this underwater kingdom. Even though this life was strange and frightening, Lami loved what it brought her. She became very rich, owning a mansion with golden chairs that sparkled under grand chandeliers, shiny cars that everyone admired, and many helpers who called her Blessed Mother. Her followers believed she was sent by God, but not everyone was convinced. The smell of incense and rare perfumes always lingered in her house, masking the truth hidden beneath the luxury. One person, Obi, started to see that something wasn't right. Obi was one of the many people who came to Lami's church, but she wasn't like the others. She didn't shout and clap as loudly as everyone else. Deep down, she felt something wasn't quite right. The grand church, with its high dome ceiling and endless rows of golden pews, held an eerie presence that unsettled her. One day, something happened that made her doubts grow even stronger. During a service, a man was brought to the altar. He couldn't walk, and everyone felt sad for him. Lami touched him, and suddenly the man stood up and started walking. The crowd went wild, shouting, "Hallelujah! It's a miracle." The echoes of their cheers vibrated through the church, but Obi's sharp eyes caught something off about the man's reaction. But a few days later, while shopping at the bustling market, Obi saw the same man walking perfectly fine, as if he had never been crippled. The air smelled of spices and fresh produce as merchants shouted their prices, but Obi's mind was clouded with curiosity. This made Obi very curious. She began paying closer attention to everything. Lami sold holy water and miracle oil that were very expensive. People believed they could bring good luck and blessings, so they bought them eagerly. The small vials decorated with ancient-looking symbols glowed faintly under the church's candlelight. Lami also told her followers to use something called the mirror of life every day. She said it would show them their future and protect them. But what the people didn't know was that these mirrors were connected to the marine world. They allowed Lami to secretly watch their lives and control them. The mirrors, framed with intricate carvings of sea creatures, held a depth that seemed almost endless when stared into for too long. Obi started to see that the miracles were fake and the promises were just tricks. She decided to find out the truth, even though she knew it could be very dangerous. One dark night, Obi hid near Lami's mansion, behind some tall trees. The night was silent except for the occasional hoot of an owl. It was midnight, and everything was quiet. Suddenly, Lami came out of her house. Obi held her breath as she watched. Under the bright moon, something strange began to happen. Lami's skin started to shimmer and change. The glow of the moon reflected off the smooth marble floors of the mansion's front steps. Scales, like those of a snake, appeared on her body. Her legs slowly turned into a long, slithering tail. She wasn't human anymore. She was now a half-snake creature. Obi's eyes widened in fear as she watched Lami slither into the river and disappear beneath the water. The ripples on the river's surface vanished almost instantly. She now knew the truth. Lami wasn't just pretending to be holy. She was tied to a very dark and powerful spiritual world. Even though Obi was scared, she went back to church the next Sunday. The air inside the church was thick with the scent of burning incense and the murmur of hushed prayers. Lami noticed her right away. During the service, Lami smiled strangely and called Obi to the front. "Come here, my child," she said softly, her voice dripping with something unsettling. As Obi walked forward, her heart pounded. Lami placed her hand on Obi's head and whispered, "Be careful where you step. You are playing with fire." Obi felt cold fear run down her spine, but she refused to give up. She was determined to show the world the truth about Lami. Quietly, she began gathering evidence, watching everything closely and keeping notes. The shadows in the church seemed darker than before, and the golden glow of the chandeliers felt more like an illusion than a source of warmth. But the more Obi tried to expose the lies, the stronger Lami's hold on the people grew. The followers believed every word she said, and they adored her more than ever. Their devotion was blinding, their faith unwavering, even in the face of truth. Could Obi uncover the truth? Could Obi uncover the truth and save the people before it was too late? This story serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of blind faith and deception. It reminds us to question what we see and not be easily swayed by appearances, no matter how convincing they may seem. True faith is built on truth, not fear or manipulation. Stay vigilant and always seek the real light. Thank you for watching my channel. Don't forget to check out more exciting and eye-opening videos right here. He arrived at the palace and noticed that his manhood had disappeared, and the prince screamed out in terror. Prince Adan decided to visit the river the next morning to plead with the mermaid to return his manhood. But as he arrived at the river, the mermaid was nowhere to be found. Once upon a time, in the land of Olivia, lived a very proud and arrogant prince named Adan, who was feared around the kingdom. Prince Adan was the only son of the king and the heir apparent to his father's throne. His father, the king, lay sick on his dying bed, and the prince could not wait for his father to die for him to be crowned king of the village. The grandeur of the palace and the echoes of royal whispers fueled his impatience as he envisioned his rule as one of unchecked power. He used his power and influence to oppress his people, who dreaded his coming reign. He even went as far as using his position as prince to rape some young women in the village, who dared never to mention his name or tell anyone that they were raped by the prince. A young maiden named Ayu was returning home from the farm one hot afternoon when Prince Adan caught sight of her and made his way with her in the bushes. The tall grasses rustled as the prince's footsteps quickened, and Ayo, unaware of his intentions, hummed a tune from her childhood. He forced himself on Ayo, warning her never to breathe a word of what had happened to anyone in the village. Ayo, terrified of what the prince would do to her if she ever told anyone that he raped her, returned home and pretended like nothing happened. Several weeks later, Ayo realized that she was pregnant and did not know what to do. Her old mother caught her vomiting one morning and inquired to know who got her pregnant. But Ayo said nothing to her mother, knowing what such a revelation would do to her mother, knowing what such a revelation would do to her family and her. As the months passed, Ayo's pregnancy progressed, and her pregnant belly was now visible. She became a laughingstock in the village, as the villagers all wondered who was responsible for her pregnancy. Ayo could not believe how her life changed within a twinkle of an eye. Her mother no longer spoke to her because she refused to reveal the man behind her pregnancy. However, Prince Adan did not slow down on his evil sexual escapades as he continued to defile the young maidens in the village who were so terrified of him. He even went as far as raping a certain young maiden named Ola, who was said to get married the next morning. Ola pleaded with the prince, saying that she was getting married the next day and had to be a virgin for her husband, as her family had revealed to him that she was still a virgin. The glow of the setting sun fell upon Ola's face as tears streamed down her cheeks. But Prince Adan paid no mind to her pleas, as he went ahead to have his way with her, stealing her virginity. Ola, unable to explain all that had happened to her family, drowned herself in the village river, and the entire village mourned her demise as they wondered what could have made her drown herself a day before her wedding. The news of Ola's death reached the prince, who felt no remorse for what he had done and how his vile actions were affecting the lives of his victims. One evening, whilst Prince Adan was strolling towards the village stream, he caught sight of a very beautiful maiden who was fetching some water alone by the village stream. The moonlight reflected off the water's surface, and the gentle hum of insects filled the air. The prince, knowing that they were alone by the stream, pounced on the beautiful maiden and made his way with her. Once he was done, he noticed that the maiden made no attempt to struggle or scream, and this troubled the prince, who noticed that the maiden had transformed into a fierce-looking mermaid. Prince Adan, terrified at what had just happened, ran away in fear as his heart raced faster than a galloping horse. He arrived at the palace and noticed that his manhood had disappeared, and the prince screamed out in terror. Prince Adan decided to visit the river the next morning to plead with the mermaid to return his manhood. But as he arrived at the river, the mermaid was nowhere to be found. Prince Adan waited by the stream for hours, but the mermaid was nowhere in sight. He returned to the palace and could not believe what he had done to himself. His father's condition worsened as the days went by, and the prince began to panic because he knew that the death of his father the king, would necessitate him to take on a new bride who would have to provide him with an heir to the throne. Knowing that he had no manhood, the prince dreaded what would happen when the people realized that his manhood had disappeared. He thought of what to do and decided to visit the river one more time. This time, the prince brought several items to use to appease the mermaid, who emerged from the river heavily pregnant. Prince Adan could not believe his eyes as he burst out in tears. The mermaid spoke up and revealed to the prince that the pregnancy she was carrying was his, and that the prince was forbidden to take on another wife, as doing so would lead to his end. She revealed that she was now his wife by virtue of being pregnant for him, and that the prince should be expecting the birth of their child in no distant time. Immediately she finished speaking, she returned to the river, and Prince Adan froze in shock as he could not believe that he was now married to a mermaid. Prince Adan returned to his palace, lost in his own thoughts, when he was informed by the palace guard that his father, the king, wanted to have a word with him. Prince Adan arrived in the king's presence, and the king informed him that the time had come for him to ascend the throne, and that a young maiden had been chosen to be his bride. The king then told the prince to prepare to meet the young maiden the next evening. Prince Adan asked his father, the king, what would happen if he chose to marry a different woman, and the king informed him that doing so would cost him the throne, as marrying the god's chosen bride was an important condition for ascending the throne of their forefathers. Prince Adan, for a second, thought that he could bring in the mermaid as his bride to enable him to ascend the throne, but his hopes of ever doing so dashed before his eyes. The king, sensing the tension in the air, asked his son what the problem was. Prince Adan, unable to hold it in any longer, went on his knees and apologized to his father, the king, for all that he had ever done. He confessed to being a rapist and narrated how he raped several women in the village, including a mermaid who was now pregnant for him and was in possession of his manhood. He revealed how the mermaid warned him sternly never to take on a new bride, as doing so would lead to his end. He told his father that he could not marry the woman that the gods had chosen for him because the mermaid would end his life. The king, on hearing his son's heavy confession, looked so disappointed at his son as he said, "There is no deed without consequence. The throne is not just a seat of power, but a pedestal of virtue." The king then asked his son how a man who had soiled his hands with such evil acts could lead the same people who he had brought so much pain to. The prince burst out in tears as he told his father that he was truly unworthy of the throne. The king then told his son that he would have to face the consequences of his actions by apologizing to all the women that he had ever raped, including the pregnant mermaid, if he ever wanted to live in peace. However, the prince was faced with the difficulty of remembering all the women he had raped in the past. His father, on hearing this, told the prince that the only solution was for him to confess to the entire village and seek their forgiveness, as only then would he be allowed to remain in the kingdom. However, the consequence of this was that the prince would never be allowed to ascend the throne, as the throne would then pass on to another. Prince Adan, although sad, agreed to confess to the entire village, and the people were shocked to hear all the evil things that the prince had done. "I stand before you not as your prince, but as a man shackled by his own grave misjudgments," Adan began, his voice barely rising above the whispers of the crowd. "I have wronged many, and my actions have cast shadows upon our land. To the women I have harmed, to the spirits I have offended, and to the mermaid who now bears my child, I offer my deepest apologies. As he spoke, the sky above him seemed to darken, and the waters of the river stirred. The air grew heavy, and villagers whispered prayers under their breath. From its depths emerged the mermaid, holding a child in her arms as she walked to the palace. The sight was so terrifying that it hushed the entire crowd into silence. Adan knelt before the mermaid as he caught sight of the baby in her arms. His heart pounded as he noted the child's striking features, a blend of land and water. He was unsure of what would happen as the mermaid spoke up, saying that their child, who was born of both land and water, would serve as a bridge between both worlds. She told Adan that he would remain on earth and raise their child, not forgetting that he was married to her. She warned Prince Adan never to marry another, as punishment for all the terrible things that he had done. She handed their son over to him and returned his manhood before heading back to the depths of the river. The king, on hearing all that happened on his sickbed, sent his personal guard to announce to the people that soon the throne would be passed on to another, as his son was unworthy of being crowned their king. He stated that in the coming days, a new king would be announced, and this news brought joy to the heart of the king's only brother, Mayoke, who was next in line to the throne. Mayoke could not believe that he would soon become king, and the thought of this made him power drunk. His laughter echoed through the palace halls, and he began ordering servants to address him as Your Majesty. Mayoke then started to terrorize the people around him, forcing them to bow their heads whenever he walked past them. He even went as far as warning the villagers that the way they had been treated by Prince Adan was nothing compared to what they would experience under his rule. His thirst for power blinded him to the virtues of leadership, and his actions soon became a mirror image of Adan's past. The people of Olivia, who had just witnessed the downfall of one tyrant, began to fear that they would soon be under the thumb of another. But what they did not know was that the gods were watching. The gods sent a message to the king through the chief priest of the village, declaring that neither Adan nor Mayoke was fit to rule. The gods revealed that the rightful heir was a child born by a certain maiden in the village named Ayo, who was raped by Adan a few years ago. His name was Az, and the gods revealed how his mother, Ayo, toiled and labored to look after him alone, fearing what would happen if anyone knew that Az was the son of Prince Adan. She often worked late into the night weaving baskets to sell at the market, her hands calloused but determined. The gods warned the sick king that Uz had to be crowned king as soon as possible to avoid being killed by the king's brother, Mayoke. The king, knowing how dangerous and desperate his brother could be, sought out the child secretly and crowned him king before the chief priest and the gods of the land. Ayo could not believe how the gods finally smiled down on her, as she now became the mother of the king. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Uz seated on the throne, his small hands clutching the royal scepter. By the time Mayoke caught wind of the information, Uz had already been crowned king, and this angered him greatly as his hopes of becoming king were dashed before his eyes. Mayoke, fueled by his rage and desire for the throne that he believed was rightfully his, plotted to kill the young king, Uz. His plans, however, were thwarted by the little king's mother, Ayo, who stood guard and protected her son from Mayokai. Mayokai was then sent away from the palace by the little king, who warned him never to come close to the palace again because of his evil actions. The little king's reign began with the promise of peace and the wisdom of the gods guiding him. Under the care of his mother and the tutelage of his grandfather, he grew to be a wise and just ruler, loved by all. He united the land and brought prosperity to Olivia. As for Prince Adan, he apologized to Ayo and his son for all that he put them through. He later moved out of the palace and spent his days in quiet seclusion, raising the son that he had with the mermaid. The child, named Anu, was indeed a bridge between the two worlds, as he interacted perfectly with animals and the fishes in the sea. His mother, the mermaid, visited at intervals, her voice echoing through the wind when she arrived, and Prince Adan lived all his life married to the mermaid, unable to marry another. This story teaches us that every action has consequences. Power should never be used to oppress or harm others, as no bad deed goes unpunished. True leadership is about serving with humility and integrity, not dominating and terrorizing those who depend on you. Redemption begins with accountability and genuine remorse, and only through facing the consequences of our actions can we hope to make amends. Thank you for watching my channel. I hope this story left you with a valuable lesson to reflect on. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for more intriguing and inspiring stories on our channel. See you in the next video. It was the end of the year once again, and Mr. Caleb was driving at full speed on the highway, which led to his hometown, with his family inside his Range Rover. The sky was a beautiful mix of orange and pink hues as the sun set, casting a warm glow on the road ahead. It was a very joyful moment as his wife, Mrs. Amina, and their 3 children, David, Sarah, and Emily, happily sang along to the beautiful song playing inside the car. Emily, the youngest, occasionally clapped her hands in rhythm, her laughter ringing out like a melody. Suddenly, Mr. Caleb saw another car at high speed racing towards him on his own lane, off the road, approaching him for a direct crash while the driver was swerving uncontrollably. Mr. Caleb could tell that something was wrong with the other driver. Maybe he was drunk, or maybe he lost control of his car. But when he realized that he couldn't escape his fate, he started screaming, "Jesus, Jesus, 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 Jesus." His wife and children also saw the danger, and they started screaming in fear, while their mother said a quick prayer in her heart, hoping that God would take control of the situation. But it was already written that it was their fate, and they couldn't escape destiny. In a few seconds, their Range Rover clashed with the other car, making a loud crashing sound of metal on metal on metal. The other road users quickly came to witness what had happened. They recovered the bodies of the victims and rushed them to a nearby hospital as quickly as possible. Sarah was only 14 years old when the incident happened. 3 days later, Sarah woke up after being in a coma for 3 days. She saw her aunt, Mrs. Rebecca, by her side when she woke up. "It's a miracle. It's a miracle," Mrs. Rebecca said, and ran out to call the doctor, who entered the room a few minutes later to check Sarah's vitals. The room had the faint smell of disinfectant, and the sound of monitors beeping in the background added to the tension. It is indeed a miracle. She has no broken bones or internal injuries. She only went into a coma as a result of the shock. We would discharge her in a few minutes, the doctor said, and walked away, his white coat swaying as he moved. But Sarah was confused. She didn't understand what was going on or how she got to the hospital. Where's my father? Where's my father? Where's my mom? What about my siblings? We were all traveling to the village when Sarah said, but stopped midway before she could finish. She suddenly remembered the last event she witnessed before everything went blank. The facial expression of her aunt was enough to tell her what may have happened. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Everyone died in the accident except you. It is a miracle how you survived. Maybe because you are the only one wearing a seatbelt, her aunt explained. Sarah broke down in tears, and her aunt embraced her to console her. As soon as they were discharged from the hospital, Mrs. Rebecca took Sarah home to her family because she had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Rebecca was the elder and only sister of Sarah's mother, but Amina got married before her. Mrs. Rebecca was married to Jonathan, an employee in one of the biggest companies in the country. But his rank was low and his salary was small. The family was blessed with two sons, Michael and James. They were a bit older than Sarah. Their home was modest, with warm colors and family pictures hanging on the walls. The family welcomed Sarah and consoled her for the death of her parents. They made her feel welcomed and deeply loved. But unknown to Sarah, that would be the beginning of her tribulations. 2 days after Sarah started living with her aunt, a strange man came to the house to see Sarah. He came in a very nice car and was a young man in his early 30s. He wore an expensive suit and watch. He was sitting in the living room with Mrs. Rebecca and her husband when Sarah came. They were discussing something, but immediately they saw Sarah. They kept quiet and asked her to join them with a smile on their faces. My name is Joshua, and I am deeply sorry for what happened to your family. May their souls rest in peace. Thank you, sir. If I may ask, who are you? Sarah asked. Mrs. Rebecca suddenly answered Sarah's question without waiting for Joshua to respond. He's the man your father almost killed on the night of the accident when he was over, speeding after getting drunk. I don't understand, Auntie. What do you mean? I am the driver of the car that had a crash with your father. I was very lucky to be wearing my seatbelt, and all thanks to my car's safety features, I wasn't harmed. Wait, so you're the one responsible for the death of my family? Sarah asked, with anger rotting all over her face. But her aunt suddenly stood up in anger. Sarah, are you mad? Is something wrong with you? Your father was drinking and driving at the same time, even when he knew it was risky. You should be grateful that this generous man isn't filing charges. Sarah felt her heart beating very fast. She became very confused. She didn't understand what was going on. She had a clear memory of that night. Her father doesn't take alcohol. He hates it. And they were all singing happily that night when it happened. If her father was taking alcohol, then her mother would have cautioned him because she was a devout Christian. Sarah couldn't understand what her aunt was saying. My father was not drinking that night. I saw it happen. It was you that left your side of the road to crash into us, Sarah said, pointing at Joshua, who sat peacefully like a saint who had done nothing wrong. To her greatest surprise, instead of her aunt to listen to her and support her, her aunt told Joshua, I'm deeply sorry. The crash must have affected her memories. She didn't know what she saw anymore. I will take care of it. Please don't be offended. Sarah wanted to explain further, but her aunt screamed at her to go into her room and remained there. Sarah felt betrayed. Tears started falling down her eyes as she walked away, but she didn't go into the bedroom as she was instructed. She hid behind the wall and listened to what they were discussing when they believed she had entered her room. They continued their discussion. I would promote you in the company and make you a senior staff. That would be triple of your salary with more benefits. I would also give your family a sum of 50 million naira to assist in taking care of the girl. I am deeply sorry once again for what happened. Don't worry about it. Accidents happen all the time. No one would ever find out you were responsible for the crash. I'll take care of Sarah. Don't worry about it. You are a very humble man. Mr. Joshua thanked them for their hospitality and left the house after giving them a bundle of new cash. Mrs. Rebecca couldn't contain her excitement. She started counting the money with happiness written all over her face. Hey, fortune has smiled on us. We are now millionaires. My sister's misfortune has made us fortunate. Who cares if Joshua is guilty or not? Nothing will bring back the dead, she said with laughter, the sound echoing faintly in the dimly lit living room. But her husband, Jonathan, had a frown on his face. It was obvious he was feeling guilty, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together. But Rebecca, don't you think this is wrong? That poor girl is now an orphan. She deserves justice. Why don't we tell her the truth and apologize to her? Jonathan said, his voice low but firm. Rebecca looked at her husband with anger on her face, her expression hardening. You, this foolish man, are you not tired of being poor? That small girl has enjoyed life more than you a dozen times. That is why you will remain poor, because you always want to be a good person. Where has it landed you all these years? You better accept the promotion and keep your stupid mouth shut, idiot. I wish I could kill her right now, but I have to wait until her 18th birthday so I can access the money she would inherit from her late father. Rebecca said, clutching the money tightly as if her life depended on it, and walked away. Sarah quickly entered her room before her aunt would see her. She sat on the bed with tears in her eyes and started thinking about her parents and siblings. The faint moonlight streaming through the window cast shadows on her face, reflecting the depth of her sorrow. She felt very hurt and betrayed. Suddenly, Rebecca entered the room without knocking. You senseless, lazy girl. Can't you see that there are plates to be washed in the kitchen? Are you mad now? Go and do the dishes before I descend on you, lazy daughter of a drunkard. Sarah left the room and ran into the kitchen to do the dishes. She couldn't control the tears flowing from her eyes. Anger, pain, and a lot of emotions were flowing through her mind as she scrubbed the plates harder than necessary. I must have my revenge. The world must know the truth and everyone involved must pay, Sarah said to herself, her voice trembling as she stopped crying and hardened her heart. When Sarah finished doing the dishes, she entered the living room. When there was no one at the table, she saw a newspaper. She picked up the newspaper, and the headline said, "A drunk father killed wife and children in a terrible accident." Sarah started weeping and crying because she knew the truth, but there was no one she could tell. Since that day, Mrs. Rebecca started maltreating Sarah at every opportunity that she got. Sarah virtually did all the house chores, while her cousins Michael and James did nothing but played at home. Sarah remained patient and endured it all. Mrs. Rebecca also stopped her from going to school and made her a full-time housemaid. Her husband, Jonathan, was always at work due to the promotion he was given, so he didn't have much time to stay at home and witness what was happening. He often traveled